had been on the road for hours. The sun was setting, casting long, sinister shadows across the empty highway. My mind was heavy, weighed down by the stress of the past week. I needed to get home. My wife would be waiting for me, another reason I couldn't afford to be late. The GPS chirped from my dashboard, telling me to stay on the main highway. But as I drove, I saw something in the distance, a sign that read, "Road closed ahead. Alternate route suggested." My heart sank as I glanced at the road, realizing I would have to take a detour. A sigh escaped my lips. "I'm already late," I muttered to myself. "What's the worst that could happen if I take a shortcut?" I knew the main road would be a hassle. I had already wasted too much time with detours. As I stared at the sign, the thought of taking the shortcut seemed like the logical choice. The forest road wasn't listed on my GPS, but I knew it from childhood. My father had often used it when we went camping. It wasn't a popular route, but it was faster, or so it's supposed to be. I turned the steering wheel and veered off the main highway, onto the gravel path that cut into the dense woods. The trees were thick, their branches interlocking above, blocking out most of the last traces of daylight. The air grew noticeably colder as I sped deeper into the forest, my headlights casting eerie shadows on the trunks of the ancient trees. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. There was something unsettling about the stillness of the forest, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. A few minutes in, I heard the first strange noise, a thud, like a distant bang, but muffled, as if something heavy had fallen. My heart skipped a beat, but I dismissed it. Just an animal, I told myself. Maybe a tree branch had fallen in the distance. The road began to narrow, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I slowed down. My headlights flickered slightly, casting jittery shadows on the trees. I reached for the radio, desperate for any kind of sound to break the eerie silence, but the dial only hissed in response. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road ahead. Then, I saw her. A woman stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights. She was tall, but hunched slightly, as though she was walking with a limp. Her long hair hung in tangled strands over her face, and her clothes were ragged, as though they had been torn by something sharp. Her arms were thin and pale, her skin ghostly white, like she hadn't seen the sun in years. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just inches from her. I could feel my pulse pounding in my chest as I stared at her, unsure of what to do. "Hey," I called, rolling down my window. "Are you okay? Can I help you?" The woman didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at me, her face hidden behind the tangled mass of hair. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, as if she was trying to speak, but couldn't. "Hello?" I said again, more forcefully this time, my hand still gripping the wheel. A shiver ran down my spine as I saw her eyes. Her eyes weren't just wide, they were unnaturally large, almost as though they were too big for her face. And they glowed. Not with a soft light, but with a harsh, sickly yellow, like the reflection of moonlight off dirty water. I froze, unable to look away, caught in a trance. She took a step forward, her movements slow, deliberate, but somehow unnatural, like a puppet, whose strings were being pulled by someone else. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice trembling now. She didn't respond, but her lips parted, and I heard her whisper something, her voice faint, barely audible over the hum of my engine. "Leave, now." A chill swept through the car, settling in the pit of my stomach. A warning. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I started to roll up the window, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman stumbled backward, disappearing into the woods. I slammed the car into gear and sped away, the engine roaring beneath me as I accelerated through the winding road. My heart was racing in my chest. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her following me, but there was nothing. Just the thick, inky darkness of the woods behind me. I tried to shake it off, but the image of her eyes stayed with me, like a haunting, ghostly presence in my mind. And then, out of nowhere, another sound. A low, guttural growl. It didn't come from the woods, but from beneath my car. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car lurched violently, and then I heard a massive thump, followed by a high-pitched squeal. Something had just struck the undercarriage of my car, something heavy. The car jerked to a halt, and I felt a jolt run up my spine. I quickly threw the car into park and grabbed the flashlight I kept in the glove compartment. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart thudding in my chest. I got out, flashlight in hand, scanning the dark road beneath the car. At first I saw nothing, but then, at the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something of dark shape, large and bulky, crouching near the front wheel. It was a figure, a man, or at least, it looked like one. But he was hunched over, his limbs twisted unnaturally, his face obscured by dark, matted hair. He didn't move at first, just stayed there, crouching low to the ground. I took a few cautious steps back toward the car, my breath quickening. The figure suddenly shifted, and I froze, caught between fight and flight. The man, if that's even what it was, grinned at me, and his eyes glowed with the same sickly yellow as the woman's. "Get back in the car," I heard a voice hiss, low and rasping. "You shouldn't be here." I didn't wait to hear more. I jumped back into the car, slammed the door shut, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, as if protesting, but finally roared to life. I sped off again, my hands clenched around the steering wheel, my mind racing. The engine hummed steadily as I pushed the car forward, the headlights barely cutting through the oppressive darkness of the forest. The road was narrow, with twisted branches clawing at the sides of the car like skeletal hands. Despite the gas pedal pressing firmly beneath my foot, it felt as if the forest was pushing back against me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that I was being lured, coaxed into something I couldn't yet understand. The GPS on the dashboard flickered again, and I glanced down. It had stopped updating altogether. I tried swiping at the screen, hoping to get it to work, but it was frozen, the map showing only the jagged outline of the forest, no roads, no routes. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark. I looked in the rearview mirror, the haunting yellow eyes of the woman, and that strange, twisted figure were already fading from my mind, but the feeling of their gaze lingered, an oppressive weight on my chest. I wasn't sure if I was just imagining things, or if they were real, but I was starting to believe it didn't matter. As I sped down the winding path, the trees seemed to close in on me, growing thicker, the shadows deeper. It was as if the road itself was being consumed, slipping away into an impenetrable blackness. The headlights barely illuminated anything beyond a few feet ahead. Every now and then, I saw movement, a flicker in the corner of my vision, a shadow darting across the road. The temperature had dropped sharply. My breath fogged up the windshield, and I pulled the collar of my jacket up, trying to ward off the sudden chill. I should have turned back. I should have taken the long way, stayed on the main road. But it was too late now. The road was already spiraling out of control, and I was helplessly caught in its descent. The forest grew quieter, too quiet. The usual sounds of nocturnal creatures, chirping insects, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush had disappeared. The silence was suffocating, pressing in on me like a physical thing. Suddenly the car jolted. The tires squealed against the gravel as I fought to regain control. Something had hit the car, a large object, perhaps a rock or a fallen branch. I slammed my foot on the brake, skidding to a stop. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt unnatural, as though the world had frozen in place. The stillness was deafening. I got out of the car cautiously, the cool night air biting at my skin. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the road. Nothing. I walked around the back of the car, checking for any damage. That's when I saw a large, gnarled tree stump at the edge of the road, its roots stretching like twisted fingers across the gravel. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. The air around me felt wrong. Heavy, almost as if the forest itself was watching me. The forest didn't just exist, it wanted something. The deeper I went into it, the more the feeling became unbearable. I had to find a way out. Turning back, I made my way back to the driver's seat, my heart pounding harder than ever. I couldn't shake the image of that woman, her wide eyes glaring at me, those glowing, unnatural pupils. What did she want from me? Why was she here? I was about to get in when I heard something, whispers. Low, guttural sounds like people murmuring, just beyond the trees. I froze. I glanced around, trying to pinpoint the source. The whispers grew louder, their tone darker, more insistent. I stepped back, scanning the trees, my flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I saw them. Figures. Hunched, distorted shapes hidden in the shadows of the trees. There were more of them now, dozens, maybe hundreds. Their glowing eyes pierced the darkness. They were watching me, waiting for something. I was no longer alone. Suddenly, a loud, ear-splitting scream shattered the silence. It wasn't human, it was a sound so primal, so filled with anguish, that it sent a shockwave of pure terror through my body. I spun around. The woman. The one who had stood in the road earlier. She was standing there now, just feet away from me, her body writhing unnaturally. Her face was twisted in an agonizing grimace, her lips pulled back to reveal jagged teeth, sharp and blood-stained. The pale light of the moon reflected off her skin, making her look like a ghost, a thing not meant to exist in this world. Her eyes, those haunting eyes, they were still glowing. I stumbled back, my legs unsteady as I fell into the dirt. The other figures, the twisted, deformed beings that I had seen at the edges of my vision, moved closer. They weren't human. They were something else. I backed away, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by fear. My breathing was ragged, my pulse pounding in my throat. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the woman lunged toward me. Her mouth opened wide, and her screams filled the air, louder than anything I'd ever heard before. The world tilted, and everything around me began to spin. My vision blurred. I felt a sharp pain at the back of my skull, a blow so hard it knocked me off my feet. I fell, the darkness consuming me. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was the glow of their eyes, so many eyes, staring at me from every direction. I awoke in complete darkness. My head throbbed painfully, as if someone had beaten it with a blunt instrument. My limbs felt heavy, like they were weighted down, and I couldn't seem to move. My mouth was dry, and I couldn't remember how long I had been unconscious. For a moment, I wondered if I was still dreaming, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But then, the reality of the situation hit me. The air was thick with a damp, musty smell, and the ground beneath me was cold, hard stone. Slowly, I forced my eyes open, but there was nothing to see. No light, no shadows, just utter blackness. Panic set in as I tried to sit up, but my body was stiff, uncooperative. My fingers brushed against something rough and cold, like the surface of the ground was made of ancient stone. My mind raced, desperately trying to piece together what had happened. The woman, the figures, the glowing eyes. I had been attacked. But where was I now? The memories were fuzzy, disconnected, like a series of fractured images flashing in my mind. The forest, the whispers, the nightmarish woman. I remembered the feeling of their eyes on me, the scream, and then the blow to the head. Everything after that was a blur. I reached for my phone, but it was gone. The flashlight too. Nothing but darkness and the eerie weight pressing down on me. Suddenly a low hum filled the air, and I froze. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. The hum was constant, vibrating the air around me, deep and guttural. It seemed to pulse with a rhythm, a pulse that matched the beat of my own heart. Then, a voice broke through the silence. It wasn't the woman's, but it was just as eerie. Cold, emotionless, and faintly distorted. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice came from nowhere, yet everywhere at once, filling the space around me. My breath caught in my throat. Who are you?" I croaked, my voice weak. There was no response, only that same low hum. The air grew colder, and the weight pressing down on me intensified. Something was watching me. A soft click echoed in the darkness. Then, slowly, a faint light appeared in the distance, flickering like a distant star. I strained my eyes, trying to make out the shape, but it was too far. I could hear something else now, a shuffling, like footsteps, getting closer. The sound was soft at first, but it grew louder with every passing second. I could feel the presence drawing nearer, could almost feel the breath of whatever it was on the back of my neck. Then the light grew brighter, illuminating the space around me. It wasn't a star at all. It was the woman. The same woman. The one with the glowing eyes. She stood in front of me, her face pale and sickly under the flickering light. Her mouth was twisted into that agonizing grin again, her lips parted to reveal sharp, jagged teeth. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse and weak. I was shaking now, unable to control the fear that surged through me. The woman didn't respond, but her eyes, the eyes bore into me, filled with something I couldn't comprehend. They weren't just watching me. They were judging me. They were waiting for something. Suddenly she spoke, her voice soft and distant. The road never ends. I stared at her, confusion and terror consuming me. What do you mean? Her grin widened, and she stepped back, vanishing into the shadows. But the words lingered in the air, repeating over and over in my mind. The road never ends. The road never ends. And then, it clicked. It was the road. It was always the road. I had been here before. I had taken the shortcut, the same path that everyone before me had taken. The road that no one had ever returned from. The road that cursed them to wander in this endless loop. I wasn't lost in the woods. I wasn't trapped in a forest at all. I had never left. The forest wasn't a place. It wasn't even real. The trees, the shadows, the figures that haunted me, they were all part of this twisted reality I had stumbled into. The road had never ended, because there was no way out. It was an illusion, a place created to keep all of us trapped forever. The hum around me grew louder, vibrating through my chest. I could feel the pulse of it, steady and relentless, like a heartbeat that never stopped. And then, I saw it. The road. I blinked, and suddenly there it was, stretching out before me, as if it had always been there. It was the same road I had driven down, the same one that had led me into the woods. But now, it was different. It was familiar. I recognized the car parked on the side of the road. My car. I was back at the beginning, standing at the same spot where I had first veered off the highway. But something was wrong. The woman appeared again, standing just behind me. Her eyes glowed brighter now, filling the space with an unnatural light. She wasn't just watching me anymore, she was waiting for me to do something. Why? I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't answer, but something about her posture seemed to change, as if she were nodding, urging me to make a choice. I turned, and there was the road, stretching out before me, leading me back to where it had all started. A path I had taken before. But this time, it was different. The road wasn't just a way out. It was a trap designed to keep me stuck in the cycle. The twist hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never left the road. I had never escaped. The woman, the figures in the forest, the eerie whispers, they were all part of the cycle. I had been here before, countless times, and every time the road would pull me back, trapping me in this never-ending loop of fear, confusion, and despair. And now, the terrifying truth became clear. I wasn't meant to leave. I was part of the road. The road was me.